There's a quiet shift that happens in the space between two people when attraction begins to form. And most men never notice it because they are too focused on what to say instead of understanding what their words actually do. They believe that attraction is built through effort, through constant communication, through showing interest as clearly and as often as possible. But the truth operates on a completely different level. Attraction is not built on how much you say, but on what your words represent when they leave your mouth. It is not about volume, it is about weight. And most men, without realizing it, strip their words of all weight the moment they start speaking from need instead of control. When a man interacts with a woman he is drawn to, there's an internal pressure that builds inside him, a pressure to impress, to connect, to make sure she feels something back. That pressure leaks into his tone, into his body language, and most importantly, into the words he chooses. He starts reaching for anything that sounds warm, safe, or familiar, because he believes those are the tools of connection. Words like baby, sweetheart, or honey feel like the natural path because they sound affectionate, and affection feels like progress. But what he doesn't understand is that these words don't create attraction. They signal something else entirely. They signal that he is already invested, already leaning forward, already giving more than the moment has earned. And the moment that happens, something subtle but powerful shifts in her perception. It's not something she consciously analyzes. She doesn't sit there and think, this word is wrong. Instead, she feels it, a quiet drop in tension, a fading of curiosity. The interaction becomes easier to predict, and with that predictability comes a loss of emotional charge, because attraction doesn't thrive in comfort alone. It thrives in contrast, in the space between what is known and what is yet to be revealed. When a man removes that space too early, he removes the very thing that keeps her engaged. This is where most men get trapped in a cycle they don't understand. They believe that if a woman starts to lose interest, the solution is to give more attention, more compliments, more reassurance. But all that does is push her further into certainty, and certainty, when it comes too quickly, kills the emotional tension that attraction depends on. He becomes easier to read, easier to predict, easier to place into a category she has seen 100 times before, and once that happens, there's nothing left for her to explore. The real dynamic of attraction operates beneath the surface, in a place where logic has very little influence. A woman doesn't respond to the literal meaning of your words. She responds to the emotional signal behind them. That signal is shaped by your state, your composure, and your ability to remain grounded in yourself instead of reaching for her reaction. When a man speaks from that grounded place, even simple words carry a different kind of energy. They feel deliberate, controlled, intentional, and that intention is what creates impact. But when a man speaks from need, even the most carefully chosen words fall flat, because underneath them is a quiet request, a desire for validation, a hope that she will respond in a way that confirms his value. And that hope is what weakens everything he says. It turns his words into tools of persuasion instead of expressions of presence. And the difference between those two is what separates attraction from indifference. There's a reason why certain interactions linger in a woman's mind long after they happen, while others fade almost instantly. It's not because of what was said on the surface, it's because of how it made her feel in a way she couldn't fully explain. The tone, the timing, the restraint, the sense that the man in front of her was not trying to get something from her, but simply expressing himself from a place of calm certainty. That kind of presence creates a different experience entirely, one that doesn't rely on constant input to stay alive. Most men never develop that presence because they are too focused on techniques instead of understanding the principle behind them. They look for the perfect line, the perfect phrase, the perfect way to trigger attraction without realizing that no word has power on its own. A word is only a vessel. It carries whatever state the man speaking it is in. If that state is unstable, the word becomes weak. If that state is grounded, the word becomes powerful.
This is why two men can say the exact same thing and create completely different reactions. One says it and it feels forced, empty, almost rehearsed. The other says it and it feels natural, effortless, and somehow more meaningful, even though the words are identical. The difference is not in the language, it is in the man, in his ability to hold himself without reaching, without overextending, without trying to control the outcome. When a man understands this, his entire approach begins to change. He stops chasing the right words and starts focusing on the right state. He becomes more selective with what he says, not because he's trying to appear mysterious, but because he no longer feels the need to fill every silence. And in that silence, something interesting begins to happen. The dynamic shifts. The pressure moves away from him and onto the space between them, and that space is where attraction starts to grow. Silence, when it comes from confidence, is not empty, it is charged. It invites curiosity. It creates room for her mind to engage, to wonder, to interpret. And the more she has to interpret, the more emotionally invested she becomes in the interaction, because now she is not just receiving information, she is participating in the experience. She is filling in the gaps, and those gaps are where imagination lives. Imagination is one of the strongest drivers of attraction because it allows her to create a version of the interaction that feels personal to her. It is no longer just about what you are saying, it's about what she is feeling as a result of what you are not saying. And that is something most men completely overlook. They believe that clarity is always the goal, that being fully understood is the path to connection. But in the early stages of attraction, too much clarity removes the very thing that keeps the interaction alive. This doesn't mean becoming distant or cold, it means becoming controlled. Knowing when to speak and when to hold back, knowing that not every thought needs to be expressed, not every feeling needs to be verbalized, and not every moment needs to be filled. That kind of discipline creates a presence that feels different from what she's used to, and anything that feels different has the potential to stand out. When a man operates from this place, even the simplest interaction can carry a deeper impact. A look held a second longer than expected, a pause before responding, a word chosen with intention instead of habit. These small shifts create a rhythm that is not predictable, and that unpredictability is what keeps her engaged, because now she doesn't fully know what's coming next, and that uncertainty pulls her in instead of pushing her away. The mistake most men make is thinking that attraction is something they have to actively build through constant effort. In reality, it is something that emerges when they remove the behaviors that kill it. Over-explaining, over-giving, over-speaking. These are the things that drain the interaction of its natural tension. And without tension, there is nothing to sustain interest. When you begin to strip those habits away, what remains is something much more powerful, a presence that does not rely on performance, a way of communicating that feels grounded instead of forced. And from that place, every word you choose starts to carry more meaning, not because you are trying harder, but because you are doing less of what weakens you. This is where real change begins, not in adding more, but in removing what doesn't serve you. In understanding that attraction is not about convincing someone to feel something, but about allowing the right conditions for that feeling to develop on its own. And those conditions are built through restraint, awareness, and the ability to stay centered in yourself regardless of how the other person responds. Because at the end of the day, the most attractive thing you can bring into any interaction is not a specific word or phrase. It is the sense that you are not dependent on the outcome, that you are present, engaged, but not attached, that you are expressing but not seeking approval. And that difference, subtle as it may seem, is what changes the entire dynamic without a single word needing to explain it.
There is a moment in every interaction where the dynamic can either deepen or quietly collapse, and it rarely has anything to do with what is being discussed on the surface. It happens in the unseen layer of communication, in the tone, the timing, and the restraint behind the words. Most men pass through this moment without even realizing it exists. They continue speaking, explaining, filling every gap with more language, believing that connection grows through constant expression. But the deeper truth is that connection grows in the space where words are chosen carefully and delivered with intention, not urgency. When a man begins to understand this, he starts to notice patterns that were invisible before. He sees how certain words create a reaction that lingers while others disappear the moment they are spoken. He begins to recognize that not all communication is equal.
Some words land and expand inside her mind, echoing long after the conversation has moved on. Others fall flat, leaving no trace, no emotional imprint, no reason for her to think about him once the interaction ends. This difference is not random. It is rooted in how the human mind processes emotional signals. A woman does not engage with words the way men often assume. She is not analyzing them for their literal meaning or evaluating them like a set of facts. She is feeling them. She is responding to the emotional charge they carry, to the subtle cues embedded in how they are delivered. And this is where most men lose their advantage, because they focus entirely on content while ignoring the emotional current beneath it. The emotional current is what determines whether a word becomes memorable or forgettable. It is shaped by presence, by confidence, by the ability to remain grounded without seeking a reaction. When a man speaks from that place, even a single word can create a shift in her state. It can catch her attention in a way that feels unexpected, almost disarming. Not because the word itself is extraordinary, but because it carries a quality she does not encounter often. This is where the concept of a charged word begins to take form. A charged word is not chosen for its sweetness or its familiarity. It is chosen for its ability to disrupt expectation. It introduces a subtle tension into the interaction, a sense that there is more beneath the surface than what is being openly expressed. That tension is what pulls her attention inward, what makes her pause and process, what creates that lingering effect that most men are trying to achieve without understanding how it works. When a man uses predictable language, he removes that tension completely. The interaction becomes linear, easy to follow, easy to categorize. There is no mystery, no need for her to engage beyond the surface level. But when he introduces something unexpected, something that doesn't fit neatly into the patterns she is used to, it forces a different kind of response. She becomes more present, more aware, more emotionally involved in the moment. This is not about saying something shocking or extreme. It is about subtle contrast, the ability to shift the emotional tone without over-explaining it. For example, when a woman is playful, teasing, or slightly challenging, most men respond by either matching her energy in an exaggerated way or trying to neutralize it with logic. Both approaches flatten the interaction. But when a man responds with calm observation, when he labels the energy without reacting to it, something changes. He is no longer participating in the surface exchange. He is stepping slightly outside of it, acknowledging it from a place of control. That shift creates a new layer of interaction, one that feels deeper without becoming heavy. It shows that he is aware but not affected, engaged but not pulled, and that balance is what creates a sense of polarity, a dynamic that keeps her attention anchored to him without him having to chase it.
This is where timing becomes critical. A word, no matter how well chosen, loses its impact if it is delivered at the wrong moment. If it comes too early, before any emotional tension is formed, it feels out of place. If it comes too often, it becomes predictable and loses its edge. The power of a word is not just in what it is, but in when it appears and how long it is allowed to exist without repetition. Most men struggle with this because they are uncomfortable with silence. They feel the need to maintain momentum, to keep the conversation alive at all times. But silence, when used correctly, is not a break in communication. It is part of it. It gives weight to what has just been said. It creates space for the emotional effect to settle, to expand, to take root in her mind. When a man speaks and then immediately fills the space with more words, he interrupts that process. He does not allow the impact to fully register. But when he speaks and then holds his composure, when he allows the moment to breathe, the effect becomes stronger. She has time to feel it, to interpret it, to attach meaning to it in her own way, and that personal interpretation is what makes it powerful. This is why repetition is one of the fastest ways to destroy attraction. The moment a word becomes familiar through overuse, it loses its emotional charge. It no longer feels intentional. It becomes routine, and routine is the enemy of curiosity. Once curiosity fades, the interaction begins to lose its depth. It becomes functional instead of engaging, predictable instead of intriguing. A man who understands this does not rely on frequency. He relies on precision. He chooses his moments carefully, not out of calculation, but out of awareness. He pays attention to the emotional flow of the interaction, to the subtle shifts in her energy, to the moments where tension naturally rises. And in those moments, he introduces just enough to amplify what is already there without overwhelming it. This approach requires a level of discipline that most men are not used to. It means resisting the urge to say more than is necessary. It means trusting that less can be more, that a single well-timed word can do more than a paragraph of explanation. It means becoming comfortable with the idea that not everything needs to be expressed immediately. When a man develops this discipline, his presence begins to change in a noticeable way. He no longer feels rushed or reactive. His communication slows down, becomes more deliberate, and that deliberateness creates a sense of stability, a feeling that he is in control of himself and the interaction. That control is what allows tension to exist without turning into pressure. Pressure comes from need, from the desire to force a specific outcome. Tension comes from contrast, from the balance between what is given and what is held back. A man who operates from tension creates an environment where attraction can grow naturally. A man who operates from pressure suffocates that environment before it has a chance to develop. This distinction is subtle but crucial. It is the difference between guiding an interaction and trying to control it. When a man tries to control it, he becomes rigid, predictable in a different way. His words start to feel calculated. His behavior starts to feel forced. But when he allows the interaction to unfold while maintaining his composure, everything feels more fluid, more authentic, more engaging. Authenticity in this context is not about saying everything that comes to mind. It is about expressing what is true without the need to overextend it. It is about being present enough to recognize what the moment calls for and restrained enough to not go beyond it. That balance is what creates a sense of effortlessness, even though it requires a high level of awareness. When a woman experiences this kind of interaction, she does not consciously break it down into these components. She simply feels that it is different, that it holds her attention in a way she cannot fully explain, that it leaves her thinking about it afterward, replaying certain moments, certain words, certain pauses. And that replay is what builds emotional investment over time. Emotional investment is not created through constant reassurance. It is created through engagement, through moments that stand out, that break the pattern of what she expects. And those moments are built through contrast, through the careful use of language and silence, through the ability to introduce something new without over-explaining it. Most men never reach this level because they are too focused on immediate feedback. They want to see a reaction right away, to know that what they said worked. But the most powerful effects are often delayed. They show up later, in the way she thinks about the interaction, in the way she remembers it, in the way it lingers in her mind without any additional input. A man who understands this does not chase that immediate reaction. He trusts the process. He knows that if the interaction is built on the right foundation, the impact will extend beyond the moment itself. And that understanding allows him to stay composed, to avoid overcompensating, to maintain the balance that keeps attraction alive. At this point, communication is no longer about impressing or convincing. It becomes about creating an experience that feels different enough to stand out, grounded enough to feel real, and open enough to allow her imagination to play a role in it. And when imagination becomes part of the interaction, the connection moves beyond logic into something much more powerful. Because the mind always returns to what it cannot fully resolve, to what it felt but did not completely understand. And when a man learns how to operate in that space, not by forcing it, but by allowing it, he creates something that most men never do, a presence that is not easily forgotten, not because it is loud or overwhelming, but because it is precise, controlled, and quietly impactful.
There is a moment that separates the men who are remembered from the ones who are forgotten, and it has nothing to do with how much they say, how often they text, or how intensely they try to prove themselves. It is a quieter moment, almost invisible on the surface, where presence outweighs effort, and restraint becomes more powerful than expression. This is where everything you've learned converges into something deeper, something that cannot be faked or forced, something that is felt long before it is understood. The truth is, by the time you reach this level, it's no longer about words at all. The nickname, the tone, the timing, all of it was never the destination. It was only a doorway. What truly stays with her is the emotional imprint you leave behind, the subtle shift in how she experiences herself when she's around you, and even more importantly, when she's not. A woman doesn't sit there replaying your sentences like a script. She replays the feeling, the pause before you spoke, the way you looked at her without needing to say anything, the calm certainty in your voice when you did speak, and most of all, the way you didn't chase what came after. That's the part that lingers. That's the part that grows in her mind over time. Because when a man is constantly trying to be understood, he becomes predictable, and predictability is comfortable, but it's not captivating. What captivates her is the sense that there is more to you than what is immediately visible, that there are layers she hasn't fully uncovered, that every interaction with you reveals something new, but never everything. This is where most men fail without even realizing it. They believe that connection is built through constant communication, through sharing more, explaining more, showing more. But what they don't see is that overexposure kills intrigue. When everything is available, nothing feels valuable. When everything is explained, nothing feels worth discovering. Real attraction, the kind that lingers and deepens, is built on contrast, presence and absence, expression and silence, warmth and restraint. It's not about being distant, it's about being selective. It's about knowing that not every moment requires you to fill the space. In fact, the most powerful moments are often the ones where you don't. Think about it. The moments that stay with you the longest are rarely the loudest ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones where something was felt but not fully said. The ones where there was just enough clarity to create connection, but enough mystery to keep the mind engaged long after the moment passed. This is exactly what happens when you operate from a place of control instead of impulse. You stop reacting to every emotion, every urge to speak, every desire to be acknowledged. You become grounded, centered, and from that place, everything you do carries more weight. When you speak, it matters. When you look at her, it's intentional. When you choose to say something that reflects her energy, it doesn't feel like a tactic, it feels like awareness. And that's the difference. Awareness cannot be faked. It comes from being fully present, not distracted by the need to impress or the fear of losing her attention. At this level, you're no longer trying to make her like you. You're simply expressing who you are without overextension. And that creates something rare. It creates a dynamic where she starts leaning in, not because you're pulling her, but because there's something about you she hasn't fully figured out yet. And that curiosity becomes the foundation of everything that follows. She starts thinking about the way you said something simple, but in a way that felt different. She remembers the moments where you didn't react the way others would, where you stayed calm instead of rushing to respond, where you allowed silence to exist without trying to escape it.
That's where the real shift happens, because most people are uncomfortable with silence. They fill it with words, jokes, explanations, anything to avoid that space. But when you become comfortable in it, when you allow it to exist without needing to control it, it changes how she perceives you. Silence, in the right energy, is not awkward, it's powerful. It gives space for emotion to surface. It allows her mind to wander, to interpret, to feel. And when that silence follows something meaningful, even something as simple as a well-timed word, it amplifies the impact in a way that constant talking never could. This is why restraint is often misunderstood. People think it means holding back out of fear, but true restraint comes from confidence. It's the ability to choose when to act and when not to, without being driven by insecurity or the need for validation. When you operate from that place, you stop overgiving. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to secure her interest through effort alone, and instead you allow your presence to do the work.
Because presence is what she actually responds to, not the words themselves, but the state behind them, the calm, steady energy that doesn't fluctuate based on her reactions, the grounded confidence that doesn't need constant reassurance. And when she feels that, it does something subtle but powerful. It makes her feel safe and intrigued at the same time. Safe because you're not unpredictable in a chaotic way. Intrigued because you're not fully transparent in a way that removes all mystery. That balance is rare, and rarity is what creates value. Over time, this dynamic starts to deepen on its own. You don't have to force it. You don't have to constantly escalate or prove anything. It grows naturally because it's built on something real, not manufactured behavior. She starts to notice that being around you feels different, that conversations don't feel forced, that there's a certain ease but also a subtle tension that keeps things interesting, that even in the quiet moments, there's something there that holds her attention. And when you're not around, that feeling doesn't disappear. It lingers, it replays, it evolves in her mind. That's when attraction moves beyond the surface. It's no longer just about what's happening in the moment. It becomes something she carries with her, something she thinks about without trying, something that gradually becomes part of her emotional landscape. This is where most men would try to push further, to capitalize on that attention, to secure it, but that's also where they lose it. Because the moment you start chasing what was naturally building, you disrupt the balance that created it in the first place. Instead, the key is to maintain that same level of composure, to continue operating from the same grounded place, to not let her behavior change your behavior. Consistency in your state, not in your actions, is what keeps everything aligned. Because if your energy remains steady, if you don't start overcompensating or trying to lock things in, the dynamic continues to develop without pressure, and that's what allows it to reach a deeper level. She doesn't feel like she's being pushed into something. She feels like she's naturally moving towards something, and that difference is everything. At this point, it's no longer about techniques or strategies. It's about who you are in those moments, how you carry yourself, how you respond or choose not to respond, how you allow things to unfold without trying to control every outcome. Because control in this context doesn't mean forcing results. It means controlling yourself, your impulses, your need to react, your desire to secure something prematurely. And when you master that, everything else becomes simpler. You don't need to think about what to say all the time. You don't need to analyze every interaction. You don't need to rely on specific words or behaviors to create attraction. It becomes a byproduct of how you exist in those interactions. And that's the real takeaway. Not a word, not a line, not a specific moment, but a state of being that naturally creates the kind of presence that stays with her long after you're gone. Because in the end, what makes you unforgettable isn't what you gave her, it's what she felt in your presence and what she continues to feel in your absence.